Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Mapp, and I'm a current GPS Solo Diversity Fellow, and I would like to welcome you to today's program. Today's webinar, Juneteenth in Action, Removing Confederate Statues and Reclaiming the Narrative, is part of the division's Activate Diversity webinar series. This series was launched by the Diversity Board in 2020 to promote awareness surrounding the unique issues confronting underrepresented and marginalized communities in the U.S. and to challenge attorneys to take actionable steps toward creating a more inclusive society. As you hear from our speakers and reflect upon the importance of advancing justice and dismantling symbols of hate and oppression, we invite you to submit questions for the speakers through the Q&A function. We would also like to challenge you to consider ways in which you can be a catalyst for change in your local community. At the close of the program, we will encourage you to share how you will personally activate diversity and stand for justice, even in the face of opposition. At this time, I would like to give the floor to our division chair, Attorney Melvin Shaw, to share opening remarks.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for this very important installment in the Activate Diversity series. This program, Activate Diversity, Juneteenth in Action, is one of many programs that the ABA, General Practice Solo Small Firm Division, has brought to you this year. And like in former programs, this discussion, we will be joined by Reverend Nelson B. Rivers III, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the NAACP and is distinguished in many ways, not only as a minister, but as a social rights activist and a promoter of justice of all people. We also have Mr. Henry here, who is President and CEO of a company that was responsible for removing, my understanding is more than 23 Confederate monuments from across the Southeast beginning in around 2020. And so we're glad to have each of them here to talk about heavy and weighty issues exploring the legal, legislative, and community efforts that are involved in advancing racial justice for all people and confronting the difficult chapters in American history. We want to thank our moderators and our co-chair of the ABA General Practice Solo Small Firm Diversity Committee, and that's Curleen Jean-Louis of the Boston, Massachusetts area. Glad to have you here, as well as Dan Tan, who is a longtime council member and activist within the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. So again, thanks to all of you for being here, and I will turn it over to our moderator.
Thank you, Chair Shaw, for your remarks. So without further ado, we would like to turn the program over to Daniel J. Tan and Curleen Jean-Louis for our fireside chat with our guest speakers.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone again for attending. We're excited about today's conversation. The first question we'd like to open up to both speakers. As we commemorate the 250th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, it's important to reflect upon the fact that while the document declared liberty and all men were created equal, in fact, not all men were treated equal or all people were treated equal, and not everyone partook in the liberty in which that document expressed. In 1863, almost 100 years later, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed enslaved persons in the Confederacy. However, it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and read General Order Number 3, announcing the freedom of the approximately 250,000 enslaved African Americans in Texas, that the ideals of freedom outlined in the Declaration of Independence became a reality for enslaved African American persons in the United States. All that being said, if we think about Juneteenth, in its essence, it is about the rule of law and equity. And that's important for people everywhere, but particularly for attorneys in this time in American history. It's also an important reminder that justice delayed is not justice denied. Before we begin with the substance of our program, I would like to ask both of our speakers, what does Juneteenth mean to you personally in light of the importance of your work that we'll be discussing today. And we'll begin with Mr. Henry and then be followed by Reverend Rivers.
Well, first, let me just say thank you for having me. It's truly an honor to share this chat with such amazing folks that are truly about the work, and I really have to give a shout out to Dan Tan, who has an incredible way of not asking you to do something, but telling you that you're going to do something, and he's been an amazing mentor to me. So there was no way that I could tell him no, and I'm so glad that I'm here. And thank you for the opportunity to share and be here with and to learn from everyone. So today, as we think about Juneteenth and everything that you just said around emancipation and just our people, and recently we built an institute here in Richmond, Virginia, that's called the Shako Institute, and the exhibit is really around the struggle to expand human freedom, and we go through the timeline of how America was built and the people that built this country and how the people were treated, and then once the emancipation happened, how did they have an opportunity to acclimate to society? And when you think about Juneteenth and the day from when it was actually enacted from Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, to when folks actually, the last people found out in Galveston, Texas, you think about the resiliency, you think about our people had to go through so much under duress and so much during these times that all these years, we never got an opportunity to truly celebrate a day like Juneteenth. Like you always hear about the 4th of July. And as an employer and someone who has a business, I thought about why is it always just the 4th of July that we're celebrating and we're talking about as we talk about America and how America was built. For me and my company, Juneteenth is just as equally as important because it is about us and how this country was built. So when I think about Juneteenth, I think about how are we honoring our ancestors? How are we giving them the honor, the praise, and the recognition that they deserve? And so platforms like this, opportunities like this fireside chat, gives us the opportunity to share what these type of what Juneteenth meant and what our ancestors meant to this country. So I'm really excited to be able to get into this conversation.
Thank you. And you, Reverend Rivers?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity again. I did want to, it caught it in the video intro that I'm not Chief Operating Officer of NACP for a long time. Be some folk over there right now would be shocked to find out that they didn't think I am. I'm also the Vice President of Religious Affairs and External Relations for Reverend Al Sharpton at the National Action Network. I work with Reverend Al. Juneteenth for me has mixed emotions because the cynic in me was that we finally get a holiday and it's celebrating lateness. It's celebrating the fact that we were free all those years. And we didn't find out if you were in Texas until 1865. I mean, the war was over practically. But I was born at a place called Bennett Point. I'm Gullah Geechee. I grew up in the city of Charleston, South Carolina. And it is the place where the Civil War started. It is the place where being racist was worn like a badge of honor. Hating Black folk was the currency of the realm. And so Juneteenth has two meanings for me. It was in South Carolina and Georgia, but in South Carolina, that Black folk were first enslaved and among the first to be freed, because the Emancipation Proclamation was motivated by actions in my home city and state. So at Hilton Head Island, places all over Beaufort County, St. Helena Island, Black folk got the word about the proclamation. They didn't call it the proclamation. They called it the paper. They got the word about the paper. And the paper said that come that first day of the new year, Black folk would be free. That's why we still celebrate watch night service. We're not watching for the Lord to come in. We're watching because that was Freedom's Eve and we would be free. So in my case, Juneteenth was like trickeration again, that all that we paid to be free, the blood that was shed, the lives shattered, and still our brothers and sisters in Texas didn't get the word until the war was almost over. And that struck me uh, incongruent to celebrate it unless you're Black and realize no matter when you finally got free, it's worth celebrating. And that is how I viewed Juneteenth. Also, personally, Juneteenth, the 19th of June, 2000, was the day that I was um, licensed to preach the gospel in Fayetteville, Georgia. And so Juneteenth then liberated our folk in Texas. Juneteenth then liberated me from the foolishness to becoming one who declares the word of God. It became interesting to me just how big it got because it was always big in Texas, since it always. I first encountered Juneteenth in Oklahoma, Texas, and parts of California. And they always got on me because we did not recognize or celebrate it. And my sly remark was, well, you know, we were free in 1863. So if I got to celebrating that, I'd be moving back my Liberation Day. And it was them that explained to me, it doesn't matter when I got free. It mattered when they got free. And I agree. So Juneteenth means that it took a while, but it's emblematic of the treatment of African Americans because it takes a long time for us to get justice.
Thank you, Reverend Rivers. That's a great perspective to put on it. And looking at your history, you spent nearly 4 decades on the front lines, civil rights advocacy. You said your date of becoming a minister is very important as it relates to this Juneteenth. But the question we have for you today is, was there a single moment that clarified for you that symbols such as the flags, the statues, the monuments are not peripheral to racial justice, but central to it?
There are a couple of moments, but let me be succinct as I can be, that I attended Wilberforce University in Ohio, the first private HBCU, named for an abolitionist, William Wilberforce, but founded by a Black man from Charleston, Daniel Alexander Payne. I was 17 when I went to school. My white English professor assigned us the book, the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. That book changed my life. And it brought symbolism into sharp contrast for me, because Malcolm talked about the symbols that accompanied the enslavement, the misuse and abuse of Black folk. So when I came home in 75, and my work really started in 75 as a radical trying to take over the NAACP, but I found out you couldn't take them over, either join them or leave. So I joined. But when I got to travel the state, I live in a city that history is its calling card. So racism is celebrated everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's a celebration of mistreatment of my people. But it was at Wilberforce that I understood that the celebration was not just honoring history, it was making a relevant current statement about what my government thought of me. And so when I got involved, frankly, and we didn't talk about this, but bigger than the flag for me was John C. Calhoun. As a child growing up, the Calhoun statue stood at the corner of Marion Square. And that statue was something my mother and grandmother talked about, because what Calhoun represented, it was telling Black folk, you'll never be equal. You'll never have self-determination because the worst bigot the state has produced has a statue in the right next to Mother Emanuel AME Church. And that became the symbol for me even more than the flag. And praise be to God, I was able, along with a lot of other people, but specifically, I got them to take down John C. Calhoun after the flag came down. And it came down in the wake of George Floyd in that summer. And I went to the mayor, who was a Democrat, used to come sing in our churches. And I told him, I am not going to have you come around singing in black churches, acting like you down with us, and you won't take that flag down. I mean, take that statue down. 2 weeks later, John Calhoun came down with a unanimous vote from the city of Charleston. That meant that the city was finally convinced to recognize the hypocrisy and really the ludicrousy of having a statue of a person who said that I was nothing and my people were nothing, that stood up my whole youth. I had to walk past that statue. It's gone now.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Henry, you were in 2020 running a great company, making a lot of money. You get a call from the governor's office, and they say, we need you to do something that all these other contractors wouldn't touch, wouldn't do. How did you feel about that, and what made you ultimately take that assignment on?
Yeah, well, let me start out with, I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and the elementary school that I went to was Robert E. Lee Elementary School. Mm-hmm. And so anything that and my mother, she was a young mother. We grew up together. She had me when she was 16. So when she came home from working double shifts, it wasn't a whole lot of checking homework and going over history lessons and things of that nature. So all I knew was what I knew from being taught in school. And it was never that Robert E. Lee was a bad man. In fact, it was that Robert E. Lee was the one of the greatest Virginians, greatest Americans of all time. And so with that backdrop, when I moved to Richmond, that I'm driving down the street and I just see the huge statue that stands 60 feet in the air overlooking Richmond, Virginia, and along with several other Confederate generals, soldiers. And I'm like, wait a minute. Everybody's starting to tell me, I'm learning more. And I always say, there's no statute of limitations on getting smarter or learning more about what's going on in your country, in your culture. And as I started learning more about just, in fact, what was going on in the city of Richmond and what these statues represented, remember, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, right? The former capital of the Confederacy, peppered with Confederate statues. And the backdrop of particularly what Reverend Rivers just said, it was the summer of 2020, George Floyd murder. And the picture of Richmond at this time, it was literally on fire. It was cars being burnt up, stores being torched on fire. People were truly out in the streets trying to have their voice heard, right? And the epicenter of where everybody was meeting was at the Robert E. Lee statue. And during the day, it was one of the most amazing sights to see. Folks coming from all walks of life coming together saying, hey, we're going to meet at this place every single day until y'all do something about these statues. And then they started putting graffiti and their expression upon these statues. Then it become this iconic figure with all of this expression from the protesters during this time across the world. You would see the graffiti and things that were on the statue. And during the day, the people were playing basketball. They were singing, choirs were singing, they were taking graduation pictures. I mean, and Black folks was having cookouts over there. I mean, it was really a thing that was going on around these statues during the day. And at night, it was a different story. People were trying to take them down physically themselves. Folks were walking around or driving around in their F-150s with their rebel flag waving. Everybody had arms. Tension was extremely high. In fact, they tried to take one down in the city of Portsmouth, and it fell on someone's head. And so at this point, the politicians realized they needed to do something, and they needed to do it now. So as they start going through the process of trying to locate a contractor to do so, clearly everyone said no. When I got the call, I was a bit surprised and you know shocked that this was actually happening and that I was being called to do so. And I knew that I needed to talk to my family prior to saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, because this wasn't just a construction project. And so I said, Mr. Governor, give me some time to talk to my family. So I went and talked to them. I have a daughter and a son. At this time, they were 16 and 11. And so we all sat down. They're looking at me like, Dad, you never ask us about projects or telling us that you're going to do, what type of projects that you're going to undertake. And I said, well, this one's a little different. And Dad may be viewed in a different light if we take on this project. And also in the backdrop for me personally was thinking about the Unite the Right in Charlottesville, where you saw that a young lady was murdered, and all that display of hate that was happening was centered around statues. You also go to Louisiana in New Orleans when they decided they were going to take their statues down. The contractor got his car blown up. Okay, so you have these two reference points of extreme violence that have taken place, but then you also have this on your other side of your shoulder saying, Devon, if this doesn't happen now, it's probably not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And with the encouragement of my kids and my wife telling me, if not now, then when, and if not you, then who? We said, Mr. Governor, we're willing to take on this mission, because indeed it was, and what we did not know would follow. I've been in business for 20 years now, and we've worked with contractors all across the Mid-Atlantic, and have developed amazing relationships. But every single person that I called to solicit help, crane, equipment, they didn't just say no, they said, hell no, Devon. And if you do this, it's going to be a problem for you. And so we had to, take all that in and understand that this was not going to be a regular deal. And we had to go all the way to Connecticut and Wisconsin to get folks that would be willing to come in and bring equipment and join our team to do the work. So ultimately, we made the decision because we knew it was bigger than us. We knew that for some reason, every single time the topic would come up about statues being removed in Richmond, there was just an influential group of folks that, whether they had the money, the political backing, or just resources, they would always find a way to keep them up. And if we knew that if we didn't do this now, when the climate was as such, and that the emotions were as such, and that we had the gumption to say we were going to do this, that if we didn't do it now, it was never going to happen. So we made that decision that it's time to step in and do something that's bigger than yourself.
Mm.
Thank you, Mr. Henry, for that response, and also Reverend Rivers for your response. I don't want us to gloss over the profundity of what you just shared. In the year of our Lord 2020, 2021 through 2023, you were in fear of your physical safety for yourself and your family as regards your work. This is not something of the past, as I think Reverend Rivers kind of alluded to in his opening response. This is something that's happening now. Before the first statue came down, Mr. Henry, you concealed your company's name behind a shell company. My understanding is that you had to get a license to carry a concealed firearm to begin to bring to construction or job sites. My understanding is also that while transporting a statue, someone tried to run your crew off the road. As you mentioned, my understanding also is that you lost employees because of your decision to move forward with this work. And I kind of said, the work found you. You weren't looking for the work, because every white-owned contracting firm approached by city and state officials refused this work. As we talk about Juneteenth in action, you're really putting your livelihood and your safety on the line, and then removing monuments and reclaiming the narrative. What did all of that physical violence that you faced, and as you mentioned, another person, another state facing physical violence as well, what did that communicate to you, to your employees, to your family about the reality of what these monuments mean to people when we talk about reclaiming the narrative and folks are saying, hey, this is part of history? If you are facing physical danger, it says more. What does that communicate to you about what these monuments represent to people and what it means to challenge them?
Yeah, Carlene, I've never in my life thought that I would have to wear a bulletproof vest while on the job site, right? And have to have a pistol while I'm on the job site. And to be watching, have my head on a swivel while on the job site. Um, it is, there's a lot of passion around these statues, right? On both sides, right? But what's happened is you've had a group of folks who have had the opportunity through the Daughters of the Confederacy to be able to tell this story, this lost cause of why these statues were put up and why the Civil War happened. And they had the ear of the educators and the school boards, and that's how a lot of this information got into the school systems. One-sided story, right? But then you have, as eloquently as Reverend Rivers stated, these things were put up to show you did not belong here, right? And that there was a level of oppressive, just beaming down on you, right? And so you have these two stories that people are fighting and butting heads against. And in this space, I saw firsthand just how vitriol the comments were and just how much hate people have around these things. I had to have 24-hour security at my home, 24-hour security. I had FBI investigation because folks were trying to set me up to say that I was doing things nefarious with the mayor, legal bills, all the things that came along with trying to defend myself. But most importantly, safety was paramount. And so, just I couldn't have nobody working in the office no more because people were always coming by the office. It just became a true display of, and you're talking about 2020, right? That was 6 years. This isn't 1820. This is 2020, where folks have really were threatening physical damage or physical harm to you and your business and people associated with you. So I just learned a very valuable lesson. Either you're going to stand up for what you believe in, or you're going to allow folks to bring fear into your life that will eliminate or prevent you from doing the things that you know are right. And I chose to be on the other side of that. And I choose not to allow fear to dictate and rule how we do things. And if something is right, it's right. And if I'm the person that can stand in that seat or fill in that gap to do something that hasn't been done before in Richmond, then if I don't do it, how do I explain that, or how do I have these conversations with my children, right? So now it's bigger than me. It's bigger than the next generation. It's us being able to share, how courage looks in real life and in real time. So that's been my experience here for the last 6 years, really.
Thank you for that. And it's not lost upon us that it's important when we talk about reclaiming the narrative. I just, in researching your story, recognize that if you did not own your own business, to your point, you're talking about the timing, but even just the logistical aspect, these monuments still would have been standing to this day. So I think it's important that when marginalized folks have the opportunity to own things, I'm an intellectual property attorney, so I know the importance of ownership, own things, and lead and be in charge. It's important because truly this could have went another way if you did not own your business and if you did not stand up for what is right. So we truly appreciate you. And look at this, Mr. Henry. You described the moment when the Stonewall Jackson statue came off its pedestal in Richmond, kind of like in this movie-like scene. Church bells chimed, thunderclap, the crowd erupted, and observers were crying. It was raining at the time. Can you describe what that felt like in light of everything that you went through, in light of the death threats, in light of the physical violence, in light of the threats as regards your financial livelihood? Can you describe what that felt like and was there a spiritual or emotional dimension to that work that surprised you?
It was an absolute unbelievable film that I can't recreate if I tried, because there was just so much emotion that was building up because of one, it was our first one, right? It was July 1st, 2020. And
Wow.
it was me and my team in the rain. It was a monsoon, literally, trying to figure out, there's nothing, there's no manual on how to take these down, right? Because they weren't intended to come down. So we're trying to figure it out on the fly with thousands of people surrounding you. And then here's a little funny moment. Every hour on the hour I was out there, my phone would ring, and it was my mother calling from South Carolina saying, "What's taking you so long, boy?" I'm like, "Mom, you have to take it down a couple of notches. You see me working." So she's watching from her couch in South Carolina, and me trying to be in the moment of, all right, how and what is the best way to do this in a safe manner. So finally, once we got it off, as you stated, it's literally from a movie. Lightning was struck. Church bells were ringing. People were jumping up and down, crying. The rain was coming down. I'm party hopping. My brother, who's also my fraternity brother, we're party hopping. We're jumping up and down, doing all the things. And then there was this one young lady in the audience. And she's looking at me. She had to be in her 20s, Black lady. And as I'm looking at her, she's not looking like everyone else who's super excited and joyful. And she is giving me this look. So I'm walking towards her. She's walking towards me. I'm like, expecting her to give me a hug or something. And she's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Well, we just took down the first Confederate statue here in this manner." And she said, "Well, why were you treating it with such care?" And I'm confused. And she says, "Well, when they had the knee on George Floyd's neck, they didn't care about him, and you caring about this statue." And at that moment, I realized that this was going to be, I don't know, a fight of my life, because the people that I'm thinking that are going to be all for what we're doing, she just tried to run me the riot act, or act like I didn't care. But what I had to explain to her was that if we didn't do this in a manner that was safe, first and foremost, and professional, we would never get another opportunity to take another one down. And that's why we were able to take down over 25 statues now. It's because the professionalism and the safety and how we handled ourselves, despite of how we felt about the statues and what they meant, we knew that we had a job to do. And if we wanted to get the call, and if we wanted to let folks know that we know how to do this the right way, this is going to be our way of how we handle things. And that's the way we kept doing it.
And just to follow up with that, how did you become the go-to person aside from for this? Because can you please explain how many statues you've taken down to date and how you became the go-to contractor for this type of work, this niche area that you stumbled upon?
Yeah, you never wake up and say, "Hey, we're gonna be taking down Confederate statues," right? But it's one of those things. Not many people want to do it, right? But then two, you got to have the capacity to do so, and three, quite honestly, you got to have the courage. And we exhibited all those things in how we performed in Richmond. And then once, you got to think about how much news coverage was on these statues in Richmond, right? All around the world. I got calls from New Zealand, Australia, Africa, everywhere. Folks knew about what was happening. So you had other localities or universities that were struggling with trying to find someone that can help them. They were wrestling with what to do with them. They just didn't have the operator that can come in and was willing to do it without making a lot of noise. And so once our name got out there, man, we were just called from Florida up to DC. We've removed or consulted on taking down statues, and right now the number is set around 25.
I'm glad to see Reverend Rivers is back with us.
I am too. I think John C. Calhoun got in my computer.
He
Well,
won't
Him or
win.
one of
He
the
won't
flag
win, brother.
sergeants.
that's for
Yeah.
sure. So Reverend, we had a question for you dealing with there was a march in Columbia that you were involved in, you sort of led, where there were more than 50,000 people
Yes.
came to South Carolina to the State House, and they were demanding the removal of the Confederate battle flag. And ultimately, there was what they called a compromise. The flag was moved to a pole on the Capitol grounds in exchange for the Heritage Act. And in hindsight, how would you evaluate that compromise? Was it a victory, a defeat, or something more complicated?
Well, I was younger then. I called it a sellout. And I talked about everybody who signed it. Let me give a little context.
Sure.
My biggest work with the NACP, and I would say the most impactful, was when I became the state director in '84. There were only 50 Black elected officials in the whole state of South Carolina. When I left in '94 to become the regional director in Atlanta, Georgia, in 2 years we had 386. I had a significant amount to do with that. We started doing single member districts all over South Carolina, including the General Assembly. Every one of those Black senators who were sitting in those seats, except for one seat, I drew those districts, or the NAACP drew those districts. And my feeling was they owe more to us than they did to their white colleagues. Now, in their view, and this is where I could never serve as an elected official, I don't believe, because there has to be somebody in the middle who will compromise with the other side. I ain't your boy. That's not me. And so also needs to be somebody who stands up for what you believe. These are people who are friends. One of them was the chair of political action for the state NAACP. And I asked each one of them, why in the world the anger that came to me was I was in the debate. I left to go back to Baltimore with Kwesi Mfume because I was at that time living or commuting between Atlanta and here. And when I got out of town, they cut the deal. And they tried to sell that. It never got sold. Because our view was, at least when the flag was on the dome, you had to look up to see it. They put it at street level. So to say that we were a little upset would be a gross understatement. So we never gave up. We called it for what it was. But a little background on how we got to the 50,000. In 1999, the mayor of Charleston, Joe Riley, it really was his brainchild and his heart that created the International African American Museum we have in here now. He raised the money for it. He led the effort. He got it done. He's not doing well now, but he and I became friends. Sullivan's Island is a place where when the slaves came into Charleston, they were taken to pest houses to break them. And the lie was told they were going to be decontaminated. No, they were being infested. He decided that he wanted to honor those Africans who never were talked about by having a monument put up. And it was 4th of July. The Lord has a sense of humor. So he asked me to be the speaker. And he was advised against it because I'm going to say what I'm going to say no matter where I am. And he said, no, I want Nelson to do it. And I said to him in the whole crowd, I found it strange, Mayor, that we would honor the dead Africans, but insult their living descendants every day by flying that flag at the Capitol. Joe Riley committed that day that he would work with me and follow my lead in trying to take the flag down. He walked from Charleston to Columbia and asked me to walk with him. I said, no, bro, I ain't walking with you on the highway from Charleston to Columbia. So I met him in Lexington County, the most racist county in South Carolina, probably. And he said, why don't you walk the rest of the way? I said, no, it'd be target practice and they will be shooting at you. But because of the attention that it generated, I got the NACP to pass a resolution in 1999 that became effective January 2000, to boycott the state of South Carolina. We issued economic sanctions against South Carolina for flying the flag. And the sanctions idea came to me at that event when Mayor Riley. So to fast forward, at the time in 2000, we could not get the votes to revisit the flag. The members said, it's not on the dome anymore. You ought to be satisfied. Well, we weren't. So we had a march on King Day. It became known as King Day at the Dome. We had a racist member of the Senate named Arthur Ravenel. He called the NAACP at the time the National Association for the Advancement of Crazy People. And he was trying to discourage us, but he really helped us. We had folk who weren't going to march with us, but because he attacked the logo and the name, they came. So we had 50,000 people. I was not supposed to be the keynote speaker, but I was trained by the best. Jesse Jackson is my godfather in the movement. So when you get the mic, use it or lose it. So I got up. From that day, January 2000 to 2015, every year, we tried to take it down. The last Democrat to be governor of South Carolina was a friend, Jim Hodges. I went to meet with him and strategize, and the man who was probably the single most important person to keep the flag up was named Glenn McConnell. He met me in the hall, coming from the governor's office, wanted me to know, Mr. Rivers, as long as I'm alive, that flag will never come down. I said to him, Senator, you don't know me. I'm from the land of never. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And everything you ever told me I would never do, either I have done or will do, and that includes taking that flag down. He became the president of the College of Charleston with no education background. His sweetheart deal to leave the state Senate was to become president of the oldest college in the South with no background. He was not just a DEI, he was a joke eye. It's funny that somebody like this, and they come to us talking about DEI, and the greatest symbol of DEI being bad that I ever know was Glenn McConnell. Here's a white guy who can barely talk. His law firm failed. He had a Confederate relic store that also failed, a failed businessman, a failed lawyer, and they honored him by making him the president of the college. So right away, we ain't feeling that. When the time came is when Emmanuel slaughter happened. When they killed the 9 people at Mother Emanuel. That's the church I got married in. That's the church our daughter got married in. Clemente Pinckney, who was the pastor who was shot first, was a friend. We were together the week before when Nikki Haley had to sign the body camera bill for the killing of Walter Scott on video. So with that as the backdrop, we were doing the Freedom Road tour, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, coming back to South Carolina. When the word came that night that there was a killing, a mass killing, and they said it was in Charleston, and they said the church was Emmanuel. Which one? There are 3 of them. Is Emmanuel 165, 110 Calhoun Street. I came on back from Alabama, got on the ground, and I called the mayor of North Charleston, the mayor of Charleston, asked them to work with us to have a area-wide prayer service. And the mayor, Riley, asked me who was going to give the closing remarks. And I lied to him and told him I don't know. And it was me. And I closed it.
Uh-oh. Like we lost the Reverend. Somebody didn't want him to make that statement. So I'm going to pivot
Chime
over
in
to,
here. Hopefully he'll come back, but
he'll
he
come
closed
back.
it because I was at the church.
Okay, Michelle,
Yeah.
fill in for us.
So he closed it by calling for the removal of the Confederate flag at the State House. And so if you remember, Mother Emanuel happened on June 15th, and I believe it was on July 3rd, the flag came down.
Okay. Okay, that's great. I'm going to pivot over to Mr. Henry for a minute. Now, when you took down that statue, the first one, we didn't show it today, but in the Good Morning America piece, you had a quote about something, and I'm going to get it wrong, so I want you to correct me, about it was a black man who did something to put it up and a black man to
Yeah.
take it down. Tell me a little bit of color on that.
Yeah, so there was a black editor of the Richmond Planet, which was the black publication in Richmond. The editor was a man by the name of John Mitchell Jr. And he was just as about it as you can get. I mean, he sounds like Reverend Rivers, right? He wants all the smoke, right? That type of individual, but he was vehemently opposed to the statues going up, particularly in 1890 when the Robert E. Lee statue was going up. And in writing, you know, well, let me back up. As I was going through this process, before we actually got to the Lee statue, the elders in the community would consistently ask me, do you know about John Mitchell Jr.? And do you know about his quote? And obviously that would inspire me to learn more about him and understand, the work he did. And this quote that they were referring to was in the paper he published. He said, and just to paraphrase, there will be black men that put the statue up, and should the time come, it'd be a black man that takes it down. And every time I think about that quote, I still get chills because in 1890, this man was thinking about me. And to be able to live out that prophecy in a manner that, you never could have imagined something like this happening. It's truly a blessing and divine how the universe kind of puts you in places where you have no idea you were supposed to be in. And that's what encouraged the book to be written. And that's the title of the book is Should the Time Come. And it's about you having to do something bigger than yourself and not letting fear kind of drive your decisions and things of that nature.
That's good. And that's literally crazy that 131 years before you did the work, someone had already prophesied that. So that's amazing. Mr. Henry, we talked a lot about your work dismantling symbols of oppression through the removal of Confederate monuments, but you were also the general contractor for the memorial to enslaved laborers at the University of Virginia. And you actually did that work. That work preceded your removal of the Confederate statues, I believe, in spring 2020. And the memorial to enslaved laborers at the University of Virginia honors the 4,000 to 5,000 enslaved persons who worked and lived at UVA during the time of slavery. You have now both torn down monuments to the Confederacy and helped erect a monument to those the Confederates sought to keep in chains. How do you kind of hold those two works in the same hands, and which work felt heavier to you?
That's a great question. And someone shared that with me. I was the only man on the planet who's taken down statues and removed statues of the enslaver while building up memorials to those that were enslaved. And so, when someone says that, it kind of gives me this badge. I'm like, wow, I got to carry that. And just the weight of, both of them are significant for the country, right? It's not just a black thing. This is for the country, because when you think about the University of Virginia, you hear Thomas Jefferson's name, but in reality, there were black hands, there were black laborers that built that university that never truly got their proper due. And so when we built that memorial, that was kind of what put us on this trajectory of public space, telling stories through construction, and being able to have something that's going to be here for not just for me to see, but my kids to be able to see something that is built for us by us, right? And so when you think about that memorial, we would go on to build a memorial to a burying ground where our ancestors were not given proper burials. And at the University of Richmond, we just completed one. We just finished there's a man by the name of Skipwith Roper, and Adam. He built, or he was the first black man to own a home in Jackson Ward, right? And they called Jackson Ward the Harlem of the South. And And, we can go on and on about how the interstates have destroyed some of the best Black communities. But this home, we just built a replica of that. And so we're doing the work in that space as well to build up the stories, to tell the truth. In this year that we're celebrating 250, we also need to celebrate the true contributions that Black folk have had to this country and still have to this country. And so I'm sitting in that seat. I'm rooted in that space, and I'm really happy to be able to do those things because, again, if I wasn't stepping up to do this type of work, if my team wasn't willing to be in these seats to do the work with me, these projects probably wouldn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. In the words of the great Nipsey Hussle, the marathon continues. So it's not just about tearing statues down, it's about building monuments to honor those folks whose backs we literally stand on as the foundation of the building of this country and reclaiming the narrative. So thank you.
That's right.
Reverend Rivers, we'll pass it back to you. I know you're finishing up, Michelle, kind of finishing up for you too, but we didn't know if you had anything else you'd like to say to the prior question, and it does look like the spirit of Calhoun is really fighting fighting you this afternoon, but we're pushing through.
I had to go get the iPhone to make it work. The ultimately what we did, the flag came down, but it came down because of the killings. If it were not for the murders of the 9 at the hand of a young white man who was inspired by the Confederacy, the lies about Black people, Dylan Roof went into that church and killed 9 people. 5 were clergy. I knew all 5. And Dylan Roof told Miss Polly Shepherd he was going to let her live so she could tell the story. And she ended up telling the story. In fact, the premiere of that story comes on this week, ironically, on the 17th. Wednesday next week will be the 11th anniversary to the day of the killing. Subsequent to the killings of the 9, it put South Carolina in a difficult position. Nikki Haley was the governor. We called for the flag to come down. I had the mayor of North Charleston, the mayor of Charleston, elected officials, mostly white, from all around our area, and I stood up at the press conference and said these words: "The time has come for South Carolina to remove the Confederate battle flag from the Capitol." 5 hours later, the governor, Nikki Haley, got on television without giving attribution to me at all, made the exact quote: "The time has come for South Carolina to remove the Confederate flag from its capital." You can't calculate how many lives, how many hearts, how much work was put into that. We had a Heritage Act passed to protect that. And we ignored both. When the flag came down, the General Assembly had to do it. But many people do not know, in addition to the work I did, we did, Paul Thurman was the son of Strom Thurman, South Carolina's most notorious contemporary racist, who read from the Sears catalog, The Filibuster. Paul Thurman gave the speech on the floor of the Senate. And I paraphrase him, and this is what he said: "I cannot support any symbol that celebrates the enslavement of human beings." And he was a Republican, and his daddy was the godfather of all Republicans. And after that speech and our work and our labor, they voted to bring it down. I was there when it took it down. It's the first time I cried in public because it took so long and so many people had put into the work. And the analogy I used to get Calhoun based on the flag, we were at Mother Emanuel, and they asked me why was I so set against Calhoun. And I said, just imagine if someone built a statue to Dylan Roof and put it in front of Mother Emanuel AME Church, what would you think? And they gasped. And I said, well, John Calhoun is the same thing to us as Dylan Roof would have been in front of Emanuel.
Mm.
That was the year. And then 2, 3 years later, we finally got everything right. And talking about young people, Brother Henry was talking about his children. I have a church that's intergenerational. When I went the night that they were taking John C. Calhoun down, I got over by the statue, and two of the young people were two young sisters who belonged to my church. And they said, Pastor, you're going to stay out here until it comes down? I said, no, y'all here now. This is the second shift. I've been on the first shift a long time. I'm going to let y'all have this. But we did go across the street and watch. And you know what? That bigot would not come down that night. Took all night long, Brother Henry, to take him down. And when he finally started to come down, is when I left the scene. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. But John C. Calhoun is not there. The one that I had to watch every time I walked down that area. His statue is gone. The Daughters of Confederacy putting up something with Robert E. Lee. They're making me tell the whole Lee story, that he was not the man you say he was. He was a bigot, a racist, and he hated black folk, and he owned some of them too. And that truth needed to be told. But in the case of Charleston, I said probably next to Richmond, and frankly, more than Richmond, because Richmond became the capital of the Confederacy, but Charleston was the heart of the Confederacy.
Mm.
This is where it started. These are the folk who went to war, who fired on Fort Sumter. These are the folk who refused to give up the right to treat me as chattel. These are the folk who built monuments to the hatred of myself. These are the folk who hung Denmark Vesey, who tried to plan the slave rebellion, didn't carry it out, they hung him and others. So growing up in South Carolina, and especially Charleston, we're always one step away from the Confederacy. No matter where you go, there's somebody honoring the Confederacy. So when it happened here, that means it could happen anywhere. And we have not yet finished paying for that because a lot of folk have retaliated, not me physically. I was struck by what you said about the threats. I may have had some, but they intercepted before they got to me. But I do know how many people had their lives threatened, what we went through. But for me, it was too much worth it to back up and back down. And now it's going. The General Assembly just tried to take Jim Clyburn's district. And frankly, the work that was done was in large part because of the coalition that we put together bringing the flag down 15 years ago. And it was 11 years ago now, yeah. So the work that was done on both of those symbols was a part of my childhood. They were around since I was born. I'm 75 now. When they came down, I was in my late 60s, early 70s. I grew up with those symbols. And every time I saw one, I know what it meant, that you're less than I am, that you don't deserve respect. In fact, you're so much less that we put up a symbol to remind you of when you were subjugated. That's what both of those symbols mean, the flag and Calhoun. And as I sit here now, they both are gone. And it didn't
Thank you, Reverend,
happen
for that.
overnight.
You
It took a
gave
long
us a
time.
great, you gave us a great lesson in tenacity and resilience. And I want to ask both of our speakers this question. You know, we are the American Bar Association, and for attorneys and advocates and professionals in this room who want to engage in some similar efforts in their own jurisdictions, whether it's around monuments, naming rights, public space, or other symbols, what are 2 or 3 things you wish someone had told you before you started? And I'll go to Mr. Henry first.
2 or 3 things from in what regard?
If someone had gave you some advice before you started on this journey.
Yeah, I don't know if there's advice that folks could have given in regards to this type of work, but along the same vein of just doing doing the work, right? There were so many people. I mean, this art that I have behind me is the late great Congressman John Lewis, right? Going over Pettus Bridge, and you think about what these folks had to endure, our folks had to endure. Um, I think just the biggest thing that you take away from it is that all the things we went through, whether it was the death threats, the FBI searches, the lack of work, people, leaving my company, the, the end result for me or the impact is that it was worth it. It was worth it. And if you ask me would I do it again, the answer would be yes, because it is worth it. No kid growing up today should have to see that in public spaces, right? As Reverend Rivers alluded to, his whole life, right? And he knew what these things meant. And for us and the generation I continuously talk about, the next generation, and I love what he said about he's been on the first shift, right? And it's time for folks to get into the second shift and the third shift, right? But it's the baton that needs to be passed, right? And the examples are there, and the way that we've done things in the past are not going to be necessarily the way that they're going to get done in the future. But one thing that doesn't remove in that equation, and that is courage, right? And the willingness to do what you know is right. And you stand on those things, and you will always stand on the side that's right.
Great words. Reverend Rivers, you have 2 or 3 words of wisdom?
I wish I knew how long it would take, that it was not overnight. And I think I needed somebody to tell me emotion alone will not take the flag down or take Calhoun down. Because if emotion worked, it never would have been put up. Would have said to me, are you willing to take as long as it takes? And someone did give me that advice. So how long will it take when it's down or when it's done? I've been at this, I'm in my 50th year of just volunteering in the movement, 40th year being in someone's staff doing this work. And if someone asked me as a young person, is it worth it? I echo Brother Henry, it is. But while you're going through it, that answer is not evident. I did wear a bulletproof vest. SLED came to meet me the day of our big rally with the 50,000 people, almost 60. They met me at the church where we lined up. And the SLED agent had become a friend. I had so much SLED protection that the agents became friends. And he showed up and said, Rivers, you're going to have to put this vest on. I said, man, I'm not putting on any vest. He said, I am SLED, State Law Enforcement Division. If I tell you to put on a vest, put it on. He was being very clear to me. I was being vain. I was going to have an interview with Brian Gumbel that morning, live with the whole world to see, and I didn't want to have the vest on. But guess what? I put the vest on. When I did it, I had the vest on then. But what he helped me understand, this is dangerous. And if it's not worth your life, don't do it. I didn't understand that he was being more candid than other folk who were around me. But he's telling the truth. And for me, it was worth it. I got grandchildren. They will not see Calhoun standing in that center, that square. To go to Columbia, that flag is not there. Symbolically, when the flag came down, guess who folded it to take away to the museum? A black highway patrolman. They gave him the flag. And guess where he brought it? Over to Jesse Jackson and myself to make sure we could see it. Saluted and went over to put it up. And the question has been answered. Was it worth it? Yes, because now my 3-year-old granddaughter will not have to worry about something that her grandfather should have taken care of. And I did.
Thank you, Mr. Henry and Reverend Rivers, for such poignant responses. This time together has been enlightening. Already getting feedback from folks who've really enjoyed the conversation. As our time engaging this conversation is coming to a close, and we're going to be opening up for questions during the question and answer period. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to drop your questions there. We want to kind of center the conversation or center it around action. The Activate Diversity series is about not just gaining new knowledge and information or gaining new perspective, but going out in our respective communities and taking action. That's why this chat is called Juneteenth in Action. There's a recent Wall Street article that came out on June 3rd, 2026 that mentions that there are movements to re-erect Confederate statues. So a lot of the work that we discuss, there's some dismantling. Even as a person of color, when all of these initiatives to kind of promote equity were happening, I had a feeling in my gut that they would be rolled back, so to speak, just because we've seen this before. Folks, unfortunately, to your point, Reverend Rivers, the Confederate flag came down because of the Mother Emanuel massacre. The governor approached you, Mr. Henry, because of the George Floyd murders. But after folks kind of get over those initial emotional or even just observing those violent killings change. The power structure wants to remain the same. So I ask you this as we come to a close. We are in a political moment when many of the gains made around racial equity are under active assault. DI programs are being dismantled, voting right protections are being challenged, and the political wind has shifted. What happens to this work in that environment, and what legal frameworks, community structures, and institutional relationships can make progress more durable than the political moment that produced it?
For me, it's the reality that pushback is inevitable. The goal is to never get pushed back to where you started from.
Mm-hmm.
Pushback is coming. I'm dealing with pushback right now. But let me tell you this, the day we started debate, the fight to save our vote and save Jim Clyburn's district, guess what they were doing that day that we didn't know about? They were erecting the space for the statue to Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was the enslaved man who took the Confederate ship and gave it to the U.S. Navy. He is the one who brought public school education in the Reconstruction Congress. And he was one of the most hated Black men in the history of South Carolina. But when we were going to begin to debate, we saw the shovels and asked the question, what y'all doing? And they said, we're digging up and breaking ground where the statue of Robert Smalls goes. If we had not taken the flag down, Robert Smalls would not be going up. So I've learned, I expect to get pushback. I just don't plan to go back to where I met you. Pushback is inevitable, but I ain't going back to the beginning.
Yeah, I love that answer. And it kind of revolves around the word resist, right? There's so much going on around us. And in every single one of the removals that we were part of, there were either a mayor, governor, but there was always the city attorney or the university attorney. There's always folks that are parts that need to be played, right? And everyone's not going to be the one to take down the statue, right? But there were creative things that were done behind the scenes. There were creative ways that folks made sure that, that things were able to be done legally. And so I just ask you, use your superpowers, right? Use your strengths, use the things that God has given you to be in the fight. And understand that there are going to be days that you're going to get pushed back. But as the great Reverend Rivers just said, just don't let them push you back to where you started. Resist, use your superpowers, and never let them see you sweat.
Yes, indeed. And always remember, it takes energy to push you back. It costs them to push you back.
Right. That's right. That's right. The last statue that we took down was the Arlington National Cemetery within the cemetery, one of the more egregious statues that we removed. And to your point, they are having the discussion now around putting it back up. And you'd be surprised how many times, as we've taken them down, someone from the Daughters of the Confederacy or
That's
some
right.
other entity have come back up to me and say, "Hey, can you erect it over here, or can you put it up over there?" I don't do that. That's not what I do. You go find somebody else to do that. I take them down. And what you're hearing this conversation as they reached out about, putting that one back up, I said, you got the wrong guy. And there's no amount of money that you can pay me to put it back up. So just stand strong in your conviction that there is progress happening, but it takes every single one of us on the field.
Be encouraged with the American Bar Association for standing up.
Thank you.
Because I went to the website, I looked at your information that came, and y'all didn't take DEI down. Praise the Lord. It says you still believe in DEI. Oh, you tell me straighten up and fly right.
No, that's all right.
But
That's all
the
right.
young people who come now, they don't have the fear or the concerns of the ancestors before them. And that's a good thing. So I'm confident they're not going to let us go all the way back.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This conversation, we expected a lively, thought-provoking, enriching conversation, but it far exceeded our expectations. So once again, we thank you so much for your time, and we are just honored to have you among us. I will personally be coming back to this recording to view it again, just because so much was shared. So thank you so
Okay.
much. We do again encourage you to drop questions in the chat. We do have a question here in the chat now. An attendee says, "Didn't Strom Thurmond have a biracial daughter by one of his family servants who worked on their plantation?" The person continues to state, "She grew up in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, and he supported her through his life. She wrote a book about her father after his death." Do you know anything about that, Reverend Rivers? I'm assuming this question is directed
Yeah,
to you.
everybody in South Carolina knew about it. It was the worst kept secret in the state. The Strom Thurmond had a black daughter, which means he didn't hate black people all the time. And so the daughter came. The power of that was when I went that day to take the flag down, Paul Thurmond talked to her daughters and sons as nieces and nephews. And they came up to him, and it was real, because he embraced it. He never made a distinction. These are his nieces and nephews, because they are his daughter, Essie's daughters and sons. Open secret. So yes, Paul Strom Thurmond had a black daughter. He never owned her, but the whole state knew about it. And the day that they got the votes to take the flag down, his son acknowledged and embraced, and they called him Uncle Paul, and they were proud to call him Uncle Paul. For me, it was ironic, but not for him and the children. So that means that
Wow.
the change had come. And Thurman was
Yeah.
typical of many men in power like him. They say one thing, but they're hypocrites and liars. But his son did not get the whole DNA. He got something else from somewhere else because he did not act like his father.
And that's important. That's reclaiming the narrative, to your point. In one generation, it can change if we make that decision and make that choice. And I see someone here put, see, Essie Mae Washington Williams. That's her name, Reverend Rivers.
That's right, Essie Mae.
Essie Mae Washington Williams. Okay,
And he
excellent.
paid her way to college, but he never publicly acknowledged her.
It's interesting. Okay, excellent.
I have a different word for it, but interesting word.
Please feel free to share. Please feel free to share. Dan, I don't know if you have any final words that you'd like to share before we wrap up today's program.
I think it was a great program. I'd like to thank Reverend Rivers and Devon Henry. Always a pleasure to be with Brother Henry, and he's a phenomenal young man who I've seen grow and develop. I'm very proud to know him. I think this was wonderful, and it's just what we envisioned it to be and more. So I
Thank
think on
you.
the agenda, I think we move over to Michelle to close this out.
Well, thank you to our moderators and to our speakers, Mr. Henry and Reverend Rivers, for sharing your time and expertise. We are truly honored to have the experience of hearing your story and are motivated and inspired to stand firm in the face of diversity to make meaningful change in our communities. We would also like to thank all the attendees for participating in today's program. If you're interested in more content and programming like today's webinar, please visit the division's webpage to view past Activate Diversity webinars. As we come to a close, we welcome you to share ways that you will activate diversity. And so we usually start this off with I will activate diversity by. And so I'm happy to go first, drawing from our speakers. I will activate diversity by not allowing fear to prevent me from speaking up, speaking out, and doing right, even when it is risky, personally and professionally.
That was good, Michelle. Thank you for starting us off. I will activate diversity by standing firm in my convictions in the face of personal, um, to, of, in the face of threats, and even if it costs, my own personal comfort. I was extremely inspired by Mr. Henry's story of moving forward, even though it cost him a lot personally and financially. And and Reverend Rivers, just your commitment to this work for 15 years and being persistent and not giving up until you saw the change that you desired to see. So I activate diversity by standing up in the face of adversity and also being persistent.
Yes,
Would
it's my
anyone else
turn.
like?
I will continue to activate diversity by being tenacious and resilient, as Reverend Rivers has charged us to do.
Hello, my name again is Mel Shaw, and I will activate diversity by representing what I hope is the best of the best in this profession, just as Mr. Henry demonstrated in his remarks, and as well as Reverend Rivers has demonstrated over his lifetime of career, and also by sharing the story of what I've heard today. Many of these are seminal stories that Reverend Rivers shared, and Mr. Henry as the second shift to bring on the story. So those are ways in which I will activate diversity.
Would our guests like to go?
I'll activate diversity by continuing to be intentional about folk who've been excluded. This is something they have no control over, from being able to participate, and particularly women. We're intentional not just to call it out, but to model the example. It's one thing to talk, it's another thing to walk the walk. And so I will continue to be intentional about making sure that women are not included as tokens, that they're essential to us having successful organization, churches, etc. And so we can talk it, but it means more when you walk what you're talking.
Yeah, I will activate diversity by continuing to get in good trouble.
Mm.
And as we warm up and prepare the third shift, I feel like I'm on the second shift. Brother Rivers has been on the first shift holding it down. I'm bringing in the rear. And what we have charged with preparing the third shift. And that's how I will activate diversity.
Praise God.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time, and that is the end of our program for today.